Hello and welcome to Storical. I am your host, Peter Roberts. At Storical, we think your stories are historical. History is the story of you, and they deserve to be recorded and shared. Storical is the place you come to for advice on how to capture life story, tools to use, and how to complete your project. Listen to experts, memoir writers, and product reviews. Visit us at lifestoryprofessionals.com to read information that we talk about on Storical, and to get free downloadable tips, and to follow links and books that people on our show have written. Let's inspire you to start. Welcome to episode 22 of Storical. This is part 3 in our mini-series on Guided Autobiography. Today I talk with Cathy Watson about what it was like to be a participant writer in a guided autobiography class that was given by Heidi Thorsen, who was interviewed last week on episode 21. Cathy talks about how intimidating it was initially, but she found the course to be a wonderful experience, and we will find out why. Cathy found that her writing style of being more analytical changed, and now wants to not just write her life stories, but wants to help the reader experience what actually happened. She has signed up for second and third classes in the Guided Autobiography series. Cathy's got some advice for people starting out on their journey to record their life story. Cathy thinks sharing is important for others, to understand the history of your family and understand why people are the way they are. Okay, let's listen to the interview with Cathy Watson. Welcome, Cathy, to Storical.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Cathy, you got involved in Life Story because you started a course on guided autobiography. Can you tell us how you got interested in that and how you found out about it?
Well, I'm a retired teacher, and I have always done a lot of work with kids in terms of telling their own stories. And
wow, so
I
you
retired a few years
and
ago,
your
and
husband
I lost my
died,
husband 5 years
you
ago,
are the
and
keeper of stories.
I'm sort of the
Why
keeper
are you
of the stories now. So I've been looking for a way to share those. And I actually read an article in our local paper about this process, and I signed up and decided to give it a try.
So you're keeper of the stories. Can you tell us your motivation for wanting to tell those stories?
Well, interestingly, families kind of expand and contract over time. And my family and my husband's family all live pretty much far away. For my son and his children, there really aren't folks around here who can tell my side of the family story. And so I really felt like I've become the person who needs to share that so that my grandkids and my son, for that matter, can know how my family came here and a little bit about our history. So given that, everyone else is on the East Coast and we see them so infrequently, he doesn't have cousins or aunts and uncles who can tell him those stories.
Ah, so you're doing this in part because of the grandkids.
Right, I am. I'm kind of doing a little bit because of me. It's kind of could become a bit of therapy, understanding and thinking about and thinking deeply, especially about the stories in my family.
I asked Cathy what was it about the guided autobiography classes that seemed so appealing to her.
I do better if I have structure and deadlines. I think it's the teacher in me. And so I really felt like that would be a good way for me to get started and to have the structure to help me stay on track, if nothing else.
I totally get that structure part and having other people there to, be your own support team, I guess. So you joined this group of people with an instructor. Tell me what the first session was like.
Well, the first session was basically, sharing a bit about ourselves and what led us to join this group. And then talking about the memoir process in general, and then the structure that Heidi uses in particular. I really liked that she included different categories so you could kind of think about your life story from different points of view. And so she talked about her philosophy, and it was a bit of getting to know. There were the other folks in the class. There were actually only 3 of us plus Heidi. And so it was great because we really got a chance to share a bit about ourselves in a little more detail than we might in a larger group.
I asked Heidi what it was like to go home and to write some stories for the next week, what it was like to have homework.
It was actually pretty scary, to be truthful. It's your personal story is very personal. And so consequently, that's sharing kind of intimate things about yourself, and that with people you don't really necessarily know. And so you kind of have to be brave and kind of jump in. It was great because she said, you need to share what you're comfortable with, and if you can share parts of your story and things like that. But the whole process was a little bit frightening too, just because, you're sharing your writing and your personal life with others. And so you want to do a good job, but sometimes it can be daunting to get started with that process. But, once I actually put pencil to paper, things just kind of flowed.
Huh. Did you find the questions were helpful? They were guided? Did you connect to some questions and not others?
Yes, actually, that's true. And in terms of the questions, they were great because they got me to think about that particular category or that particular part of my life in a little bit different way than I might have if I just tried to do it off the top of my head. And so it was great because I could take pieces of the questions and combine them together. I could take, ideas and combine them with other ideas, and then let the writing go in the direction that it led me.
Right. So then you shared the story with the group. What was the reaction to the group? Was it encouraging or discouraging?
Well, the thing I liked about Heidi especially was she set some norms right away and said, it's kind of like, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything. And so the encouragement was built into our sessions, and we all took that to heart. Everything was always positive. The critiquing, if there was any, was always constructive, and it didn't necessarily talk about the content. It was more about maybe the style of writing or whatever, but we always worked towards the positive, which I really appreciated.
So then you had more topics to write about. Did the writing process get easier with each week or not?
Well, I think the process in terms of the actual writing was easier, but some topics were more difficult than others. We had one topic where we wrote about our spiritual journey, which is a very personal thing for all of us. And I especially see that as something very individual. And so writing about that was probably the most difficult. But in terms of what I got from it, it was the most rewarding.
Oh, okay. That's sometimes how it goes, isn't it? The more effort you put in, the more benefit you get from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The topics increased in sensitivity as you went through, but you were getting used to writing though, were you?
I guess I'd have to say yes and no. I don't know that they necessarily got more sensitive. It's just that I think each of us connected with the different topics in an individual way.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the spiritual journey was the most powerful. For one of the other gals, I think it was writing about her father. That was the great part about this, was really hearing from other people their story and seeing how they connected with each of the topics. One of the gals, she's kind of a collector of shoes, and one of the topics that was possible to use was walk a mile in my shoes, that kind of thing, but talking about life from the point of view of your shoes, which is an interesting way to do it. And she wrote this absolutely beautiful piece about shoes in her life. And that's not something I would ever have thought about, but it really resonated with her, and what she wrote from it was just really beautiful.
So you learned a lot in the sessions from other people about how they approach their life and what they think.
Yes, and it was interesting to listen to how they approached the topics. One of the gals used a lot of humor. Another was always very heartfelt as she wrote about her past. I tend to be a little bit more analytical, and it was great for me to listen to them because it allowed me to think about it from a more emotional point of view rather than from just that analytical. And, instead of just writing fact, 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 this is what happened, it's making it personal and pulling in all the emotions that you felt in that time. And it really makes you go back and actually experience it. And I learned that from the two other gals who were in the class with me. I just, it really revolutionized how I thought about writing about my life.
I see. So the class helped you change your style and look at writing differently.
Yes, absolutely. It really makes me, I don't know, try to step outside myself, if you will,
Uh-huh.
to think about the audience that I'm writing for, as opposed to just for me, stepping outside and saying, I want the folks who read this to connect with it, as opposed to just learn about my family. And that was a different way for me to look at it. It wasn't just recording the things that happened. It's actually trying to help them experience the things that happened in my life and in the lives of my family members.
Cathy, you mentioned that you were writing this memoir for your grandchildren as well as for yourself. Did you have to change your writing so that you could see a child reading this, or are your grandchildren older than 10 years old or 12 years old?
Well, they're young. The oldest is 7. So the truth is, my goal is probably for my son to read this first, and then for him to take that and share it with them when they're older. I'm not writing it for young children. I'm really writing it for later on, maybe after I'm gone, is when they'll read it. So I just want there to be a record there. And, I hadn't really thought about writing it from a child's point of view, although that's an interesting thought.
Yes, I'm not sure how I would do faced with that challenge, but I totally get what you mean. You want it for the grandchildren, not necessarily while they're still children.
Yes, true.
Yes. When you wrote about your life, did you find that you were looking at things differently? I mean, you said you stepped outside yourself. Does that mean that you found that you came to different conclusions now that you're an adult compared to when you were experiencing that incident as a child? It managed to help you look at things differently so that you came to an aha moment or.
Yeah, I had a lot of aha moments, actually. One of the things that I shared was moving from the country to the city, which was very traumatic for me. And the upbeat part about it was I changed schools, and that was a real positive. And I wanted to be a teacher since I was little, and I had always thought it was my third grade teacher who led me there. But in thinking about it, it actually was my first experience in my new school with my first grade teacher. And that was a real aha, because, and that's just one example that, it really changed my perspective in thinking about my childhood. I had a difficult relationship with my mother as well. And in writing about it, I came to some conclusions about it that really have helped me kind of get past some things. This whole process has been really therapeutic for me. And I think in talking with the other two in my class, they felt the same way. And so I think when I say I stepped outside myself, I was outside looking at what I experienced. And it didn't necessarily make me more objective, but it made me look at it from the future, looking back at the past point of view, or the present, I guess, looking at the past.
Yeah, I can understand that. And looking at that from that perspective, it sounds like you learned something new.
I did. And it was actually pretty wonderful. And it kind of made it hard for the class to end, because I just really felt like I was understanding. We live our life, but I don't know that we always understand it, or that we take the time to understand it. And I think doing this kind of process can really help you understand not only your own life, but perhaps the life of family members, like your parents or siblings or whatever, in a way that, because you're in the middle of it, you don't necessarily take the time to try to understand what happened and why it happened and what the result was.
Did you expect to have this result before you started the class?
Oh, not at all. It was actually pretty interesting. I just expected to go learn about how to write a story about my family and, write it and be done. And that wasn't what happened at all.
You got dragged in emotionally.
I did.
Well, it sounds like you had a lot of fun doing it.
Oh, it was absolutely wonderful. It truly was. The class is actually about a 40-minute drive from here, and I couldn't wait to get in my car and go every week. So, it was, and driving's not my favorite thing. So
I asked Cathy about the classes, how long they were, and the structure of the class.
it was 8 sessions. We met from about 10 till noon. We did a lesson as part of it. I love that she always had a writing tip that wasn't necessarily related to the content, but more to writing style. The goal was to try to incorporate that, like the use of humor or, using metaphors and similes and things like that. Just good writing to kind of get us into that, looking at things a little bit differently. Then we'd share our writing. I like this structure because there was talk about the category or the topic that we were going to work on. There was the writing tip, and then we shared writing and talked about that. So I like the structure of that.
Right. So after the 8-week course, I imagine you had 7 stories. What did you do with those 7 stories?
Well, I'm still writing. She gave us more categories and allowed us to just kind of pick and choose from those if we wanted to continue. And so I hadn't really thought about it until this class about what I want to do with all of this. But I think eventually, once I get it to the point where I feel like I don't know if I want to call it finished, but at a point where I feel like it's in a form that will make sense to whoever I share it with, I think I'll probably put it together in some sort of book form for my family.
Right, that makes sense. And you're still writing today?
I am. She has 2 more classes, and I plan on taking both of them. I found this wonderful book called The Tales of Our Lives Fork in the Road. It's basically a compilation of stories that people have written. I just happened to find it at the bookstore, and it's basically people writing about their lives, and I just love it because it's all kinds of styles and stories and lengths, and it's fun to take a look at what other people have written about their family or themselves. I think her last class does a bit of that where you analyze other stories and talk about them, and I'm actually looking forward to that. So I think that really helps me make my writing more rich or whatever.
It doesn't sound like you see the end in sight for your writing. And you said that when you are done that you'd probably put it into a book form. What will you do with the book? Will you add photos? Will you publish it? Will you keep it just for your family?
Well, I think I'll probably add photos. In fact, that's kind of one of my projects this year is to go I have all of my photos, I have all of my parents' photos and all of my husband's parents' photos. And so I've been kind of starting to go through those to, if nothing else, get them organized. And so I'm going to choose some ones that'll maybe enhance or explain or whatever some of the topics that I'm writing about.
Mm-hmm.
Especially my father-in-law, who led an actually fairly interesting life. I'm really struggling with how to write about his stories because they're not mine, but there really isn't anyone else to tell his stories. So I think that's going to be my big challenge is pulling in those stories about my husband's family, because he was an orphan. He grew up in an orphanage. He was a prisoner of war during World War II and had some very interesting experiences beyond that, and really want my grandkids especially to know him. And I can tell my parents' stories from my perspective, but I find myself feeling very challenged about trying to tell my husband's parents' stories.
Is the challenge because it's hard to connect emotionally because he's not here anymore?
Right. There's that. And he was, in addition to had some very interesting experiences, he was also a very difficult man. And so the emotional piece is hard because I don't want to put him in a negative light for my grandkids, but by the same token, I want to tell an honest story.
So truth meets reality.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right. I can understand that. Yes, because it sounds like that even though you approached initially the storytelling with the idea that you'd write the stories and, get out, you connected with them emotionally. And now that you've got that particular relationship with storytelling, I can imagine it's difficult writing a story about someone who you respect, but also recognize who is a person with their own foibles.
Exactly. Exactly because I want to do him justice, as I want to do justice to all of the people in my stories. But it's finding that balance between telling the truth and painting a picture of him that's realistic but kind.
Right. Have you had that problem with other people who are involved in your life, that you have difficulty in telling their story because it's more their story than your story?
Actually not yet, because I think right now I'm kind of focusing on my relationships with those people in my life. So I'm telling it from my perspective. But I want to tell the story of my parents before me. They've told me most of that story. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that turns out, because I'm a little nervous about that because I got so emotional with my story. I don't know. It's that analytical piece of me. I worry that I need to find the balance between being objective and realistic and pulling the emotion in. And I'm kind of worried about that.
Cathy is also writing the story of her mother and her father.
I want, especially my son, to know about my parents as his grandparents. My father passed away before my son was born. And so he doesn't know him at all except through me. And I'm really wanting to make sure that he does know him, because he would have been a great grandfather. As far as my mom goes, she was a great grandmother to my son. And she was a good mom too, but she also was a very kind of distant mom. She held herself very privately. And so I want to tell her story that I've learned from my aunts. I went back east to visit them just before one passed away. And so I learned a lot about my mom then. And so I want to make sure I tell that story as she grew up and met and married her first husband and then married my dad later and all of that.
You're pretty lucky in that your family's willing to talk about stories of each other, that your aunts are happy to talk about it. And, you remember your parents talking about their lives. Not everyone's got that.
That's true. That's true. I am very fortunate in that. And I'm getting older and I want to tell those stories, or get them down on paper rather, before I can't, or before I'm gone, so that that piece of history of my family isn't lost. I'm in my mid 60s and my husband died when he was 66. And so you just never know how long you're going to have. And so I'm feeling that pressure of, who knows? And I'd love to get those stories down before I forget them.
Well, no pressure much, huh?
Right.
What advice would you give people who haven't started on recording their life story but would like to?
Do it now. Do it now and don't be afraid, because you don't know how long you'll have. And so consequently, sharing that is so, in my opinion, important for others in your family to understand the history of your family and to understand why people are the way they are. Having that is such a gift. I read one of the gals in my group, her mother had a ghostwriter write a book based on her life, and I just finished reading it, and it's wonderful. What a gift to her family. Not only the history of your family, but it's also the history of this. It's based in San Francisco, so it's the history of San Francisco too. And so bringing that piece in is important. And so just do it now.
Have you shared any of the stories that you've written so far with your son?
I haven't.
I sense a bit of reticence there. What's going on?
In some of my stories, I've been very honest. your teenage years are very tumultuous, and, I wasn't a troublemaker necessarily, but, we all have our little bits and pieces of kind of straying off in different directions. And I've shared those in some of my stories. And so I'm not sure how I feel about him knowing those things.
I see. So you're going to leave your book with your lawyer along with your will.
Maybe.
Actually, an interesting thing to do. I was doing a project and I recorded my father. And now that he's passed on, it's the only recording we have of him. And every time I listen to it, I can't believe it's my father. So I'm just going to leave you with this thought that I wonder if you could do an audiobook for your family when you finally finish.
That's a great idea. I hadn't really thought about that, but that's a fabulous idea.
Yeah.
I might have to do that.
Get yourself a microphone and get yourself some software and just talk it out.
That's a great idea. I obviously love to talk.
I think we all do. Well, thank you so much, Cathy, for being on Storical today.
Well, you're entirely welcome. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for joining me in another episode of Storical. Feel free to let me know how you like Storical, either on iTunes or where you get your podcasts. Or you can email me, Peter, P-E-T-A, at Storical, STORYICAL.com. Come to our website at lifestoryprofessionals.com to get more information about the episode you heard today. The website has free downloadable tips and links and books that people on our show have written. May Storical inspire you to story the historical, because it's never too soon to get started, but often it can be too late.